नमस्कार दोस्तों और जय हिंद। आप सभी को स्वागत है इन माय चैनल 1971 वॉर बुक सीरीज। तो दोस्तों, you must have seen my podcast video with Air Commodore KC Kuruvilla Veer Chakra regarding his own experiences of taking part in the 1971 war on the Western Front, talking about the airstrikes, the sorties and the missions that he had taken part in, destroying Pakistani tank trains, fuel dumps, and including strafing and destroying many Pakistani gun positions as well. और उसके बाद he talked about how his Sukhoi 7 fighter jet was shot by Pakistani anti-aircraft firing, how he ejected, and how he ended up as a prisoner of war in Pakistan for 1 year. He talked about his experiences vividly. आज हम उनके साथ बात करेंगे not about the combat part but in a heavy discussion regarding the Sukhoi 7 fighter jet itself. Being an ace pilot of the Indian Airforce, flying the Sukhoi 7 extensively, having I think about 400 hours of flying on this one specific aircraft, knowing almost everything regarding the instrument panels, how it works, the maneuvering, the stunts, and the weapon systems of this aircraft. We will be learning more about this vintage aircraft that did so many sorties across the border into Pakistan, serving the Indian Air Force with pride and dignity and honor for a very long time till its retirement. आज हम जानेंगे about this aircraft from the legendary fighter pilot Air Commodore KC Kuruvilla Veer Chakra. Let's welcome him to our program today. So sir, at first, you being a flying officer and who has taken part on the 1971 war on the Western Front, and being an expert Sukhoi 7 pilot, sir, I would like to know a bit about the aircraft itself. Like, could you tell me why the Indian Air Force, after the 62 war, Indo-China war, the Sukhoi 7 was actually why did they decide to induct the Sukhoi 7 into service?
Yeah, okay. So the 1962 border conflict with China, it exposed significant gaps in our military capabilities, particularly in the air power projection along the mountainous regions of our northern frontier, all across. So, following this understanding, the Indian Air Force embarked on a modernization program to strengthen the strike capabilities.
Achha.
And the Sukhoi 7 was found most economical and most suitable. As a result of which, we actually chose the option of going along with Russia for a lot of military hardware. And keeping our options open as against earlier trend of selecting only Western military hardware.
Okay.
So, yeah, and moreover, what 62 operations brought out is that we needed a dedicated strike aircraft, ground attack, which was superior in low-level operation and penetration capability. In other words, you wanted a sturdy aircraft, you wanted a fast aircraft, and you wanted an aircraft which had, multiple, which could be adopted for multiple roles. That means it could carry bombs, it could carry rockets, and it had inbuilt guns. And
also for fire support, sir.
Sorry?
Also for fire support for the infantry.
Yes, yes. So if you see, the Sukhoi had 6 stations. 2 were in the belly generally for tanks, because the radius of action was quite less without the tanks.
Achha.
So in other words,
6,
it had
what did you say? 6
hard points under
points.
the wings and under the belly 2.
Okay.
4 under the wings, 2 under the belly.
Achha.
And under the belly, generally we always positioned tanks, and they remained on for all close air support missions, offensive strike missions, especially in support of the army,
Mm-hmm.
and within a range of up to 220 to 50 kilometers. With four tanks, you had a radius of action of 400 kilometers, roughly, as I
Okay.
remember. Okay, so the Sukhoi footed the bill in many, many ways, and that's why we went ahead with it.
Acha. Now, sir, like as you had been inducted very recently in the, in the Indian Air Force, you were just a flying officer in '71. Uh, I would
Yeah,
like to know a bit about you shifting from. How was your experience? How was your experience in shifting from flying other aircrafts to shifting to the Sukhoi 7, sir? How was the
yeah.
transition?
So it's a nice question. Though I was a flying officer, I would say I had fairly good experience, which is the reason why I was put on the Sukhoi.
Acha.
So the earlier part, let me tell you, I stood first in my batch.
Mm-hmm.
So I was straight after commissioning, I was sent to Pune on the to fly the Vampire, same aircraft which I had flown my final uh, training phase in. Same aircraft, but now this was we were flying in an operational squadron, and idea was to learn what happens in an operational squadron for employing fighter aircraft. So, in
Okay.
other words, we learned low level flying, low level um, flying in a group of aircraft,
Acha, acha. These were
and
at
gunnery.
heights of.
No, all low level,
Acha, acha.
mostly low level,
And what were
and
the heights,
but
sir? Like heights
it,
of flying?
so we, initially, as you got commissioned, then you were put into these squadrons. The first uh, Vampire Squadron for gunnery
Mm-hmm.
experience. All the low level flying was done at 500 feet.
500 feet.
Okay,
Okay.
500 feet, which is really very high, as you later on will learn from me.
Acha,
On the
acha.
Sukhoi, I want you to fly at 100 feet.
100
So,
feet. Acha.
yeah, and that was an acceptable height. More than that, you were a dead duck if
Okay.
you flew 100 more than 100 feet in enemy territory. So let me continue with your question.
Mm-hmm.
So Pune was an operational conversion, if you may like to call it,
Mm-hmm.
a short operational conversion onto operational tactical flying as well as gunnery.
Mm-hmm.
And after 6 months, I think I did fairly well, and I found I was posted to number 7 squadron called the Battle Axis.
Battle axis. Acha.
Yeah. So the Battle Axis were a very old squadron and a very well-known squadron
Mm-hmm.
of the Indian Air Force. And in that squadron, I flew the Hawker Hunter,
Acha,
which
acha.
is known as the gentleman's aircraft. You could do anything with it. It wouldn't let you down.
Mm-hmm.
But in that squadron, we learned everything about a fighter aircraft, starting from the first takeoff and landing and flying a solo, then on to operational conversion, in which you did tactical flying at high level, medium level, low level, then gunnery, then air combat, and finally you get what is known as a status of being fully operational on type. So that's what happened in my 2 years on the Hawker Hunter,
Mm-hmm.
so 67 to 69.
Mm-hmm.
But somewhere in 68, because I was doing well in the squadron and I had good performance ratings in all the various flying stages, the basic conversion, then the, intermediate phase, then the operational flying and operational conversion and fully ops. So since I did well in those aspects, I was sent for a conversion on the Sukhoi
Acha.
before I got posted out from 7 Squadron.
Mm-hmm.
So somewhere around late 68 or so, I went and did my Sukhoi conversion in Bareilly with
Very.
221 Squadron.
Acha.
Bareilly, yeah. And that is where you are put through the paces of studying the aircraft and flying the basics. That is, you take off, get out of the circuit flying area,
Mm-hmm.
go into go into a local flying area. There you do handling of the aircraft, some aerobatics,
Mm-hmm.
and then finally, after the required number of sorties, if you're found competent and fit, you go on first solo.
Acha.
In the first solo, you just take off, go outside circuit, wherever you did your local flying earlier,
Mm-hmm.
and in the allotted sector, you did some turns and you did some basic maneuvers and you came back and landed. That was considered first solo.
Okay.
So after that, from first solo, you progress. With each other solo that you did,
Hmm.
you increase the exercises done on the aircraft in that particular mission. So it would be takeoff, handling, aerobatics, hard turns, positive G,
Mm-hmm.
high positive G turns, and so, and come back and do practice landings and takeoffs, overshoot and landings. So your question was, how did I transfer? So I hope that answers your question, that having done well on the Hunter,
Mm-hmm.
I was ready to be shifted to a more operational aircraft to utilize my experience and the skills that I had gained, which were recognized by air headquarters and command headquarters, that this boy or this lad or this young officer has the potential, he should be put onto another aircraft. So I was elevated to the Sukhoi, which was a brand new aircraft in the Indian Air Force at that time.
Acha.
It had come, it had come in, I think, in the 1967 or so late. And by 1968, all the conversions started of potential Sukhoi pilots. So I was one of them. And
Okay.
so in 1969, after I finished my a very nice tenure with 7 Squadron Battle Axis, I was posted to 222 Squadron. That is where I was groomed for the Sukhoi flying and all the activities that led to the war.
Right.
I was the youngest officer in the squadron. It still relates to your question. And I was the youngest officer, a flying officer, and the youngest pilot as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I must say, to the credit of the squadron and all the officers and fully ops pilots that were there, they all nurtured me and each one contributed to my growth in 222 Squadron and my flying expertise or skills, as we call it, on the Sukhoi 7, each one of them. So somewhere in 1969, I don't remember the month, early, I went into 222 Squadron, which was then located in Ambala.
Acha. Acha.
Yeah,
Okay. Now, sir,
69. Yeah,
coming to the aircraft itself, could
yeah.
you give a brief description of the airframe, the flying capacities, how you as a pilot could manage the turning and maneuvering, especially the features in the cockpits? Like Russian aircrafts, I've heard that they are very robust, and like they were also robust and primitive sometimes compared to their British and American counterparts, and how you manage the complete shift into this Russian setup. I mean, it was Soviet setup in the instrument panels to understand the basics of flying the Sukhoi 7, sir.
Yeah. So the only transfer, as I told you, was moving from Western aircraft to Russian aircraft.
Right, right.
So the Sukhoi 7 is a very rugged, solid aircraft, and the Russians are known. All their aircraft are very rugged, very strong, and they have very powerful engines.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, and the Sukhoi was typically a Russian aircraft. Everything in the cockpit was in Russian, but since the basic instruments that we used were about four main important ones, I would say the artificial horizon,
Acha.
the air, which was called the Agada,
Acha.
the airspeed indicator. All that was written in Russia, but it didn't affect us at all because an artificial horizon looked like an artificial horizon.
Acha.
An airspeed indicator looked like an airspeed indicator.
Acha.
The only change was we shifted from the Western system to the metric system that the Russians followed.
Okay.
Okay, so airspeed indicator, artificial horizon, the radio altimeter and the vertical speed indicator. These were the important instruments that we relied on, and so that was enough. And the rest of the instruments, we knew the fuel gauges looked like fuel gauges. You only had to look at the gauge. You don't have to read anything. Just look at the needles and you knew whether it's empty, full. And the corresponding lights, there was an emergency panel which indicated the fuel. So each time you press the button, all the emergency lights, you will check that they all light up. And that was enough. So we knew which light. All this we studied before we start flying, because you do a blindfold test in the cockpit and you should be able to touch and reach each switch completely blindfolded. All right. Yeah. So these are the things that we used to do. And the Sukhoi per se, was what do you call this? As I said, a single-seater strike aircraft. And the NATO had a code name called Fitter. Right? Fitter, yeah. And it was designed and produced by the Sukhoi, what do you call this? Design Bureau.
Okay.
And and we operated the Su-7 BMK, as it was called.
BMK.
Yeah. And it was an all-metal, Sukhoi was an all-metal aircraft, very cylindrical in shape.
Cylindrical, right.
Yeah. And the wings were, somewhere 1/3 away from the nose and at 60 degrees sweep. So it had a very, I would say, high TC ratio. So it produced excellent lift.
Because of the wings, 60-degree wings.
Yes, it had very thick wings, almost like a Dakota, as thick as that. Dakota wings. So, in fact, we used to make fun of the aircraft. In bar gossip, that we are flying a Dakota, but it had excellent features. And as a ground attack pilot, we found that it was rock steady at high speeds, carried adequate weapons, had a very powerful engine, so you could achieve very high speeds in very quick time. You could turn very well with the reheat on, with power at low level. Yeah, excellent turning. And so it had a nose intake, that was the distinctive part of it, with a long protruding airspeed pitot head. Right in front on the nose.
The pitot tube, right.
Yeah, pitot tube, correct. So in fact, this aircraft was, had a very high landing speed, as a result of which it was found necessary to have a secondary pitot head on the wing. So it was there on the right wing at the wingtip. I think it was the right wing, yes, on the wingtip. And it was very necessary, because I have known cases where in a very hard turn, the main pitot head has also flown off. And people have recovered the aircraft on the standby pitot head. So it had some it was a very interesting aircraft to maneuver at low level.
Right.
And as I said, it had one of the world's highest landing speeds. And it was built for rugged operations, and that's exactly what we needed. And that's why we bought the Sukhoi. It came cheap, it came rugged, it came with all the requirements that we wanted to fly in our mountainous regions with more weapons, with a larger radius of action, and coming to us at a very economical price.
Because the threat was China, so you needed to cross the mountains. Yeah.
So, much can be discussed about warfare across the Himalayas. It's not easy for aircraft to go to their areas across the Himalayas, or for them to come across the Himalayas into our areas. But the point that we all knew very well was, if they are crossing into our area, then in our high altitude regions, this aircraft could be deployed very well. It was very good for deployment, both at low levels and at medium levels, or at slightly higher levels than medium levels, where our mountains are in the region of 18 to 20,000 feet. So discharging weapons at those heights we could easily do it. And to that extent, it proved a very good aircraft. In fact, I will just go one step ahead and tell you, I think in the whole 1971 war, this aircraft did 1,500 or so missions
Right.
between the 8 squadrons that we had. So 6 or 8 squadrons, I don't remember exactly all of them, but we had 6 to 8 squadrons, and between these squadrons we had done about 1,500 missions
Hmm.
in that 17-day war. So you can see that it was very well employed. And there are some very nice stories in my personal experience and in the war where this aircraft has proved its ruggedness, and to that extent, our choice was very, very good.
I would like to know a few of those stories, sir, of your flying stories on the 71 war and
Yeah.
on the aircraft itself, sir. Mostly on the aircraft.
Yeah. So, coming to the war,
Hmm.
as I said, we were very well tutored in 222 Squadron, and everybody contributed to my growth. And I did extremely well, and I have to say this. It's with a sense of pride
Hmm.
that I had, in fact, the best gunnery scores in the squadron amongst all the pilots. And even in air combat, I had a very good reputation of fighting this, which later on, came out and was very evident years later when a MiG-27 from the tactics and a MiG-21 pilot from the tactics and air combat, establishment, TAC Day, he visited our unit
Hmm.
just to help with this similar aircraft combat. I remember I did a 1 versus 1 combat with him, and I got behind him, and he was very, very appreciative, and very nicely he wrote in my blue book that this was excellent combat mission, and I have learned that a Sukhoi can get behind a MiG if you're not alert. So that was one very
I mean,
good
using a
lesson that I
MiG-27, I say.
no MiG-21 I'm saying.
MiG-21, okay.
Yeah, because MiG-21 and Sukhois were in TAC Day
Hmm.
at that time for dissimilar air combat training. Okay, these were the two aircraft there. Anyway, so that was just one. Coming back to your question, I was very well trained, and I had all these, what should I say, uh, landmarks to my name of good gunnery scores, good air combat performance. And so we knew that the war is coming up after Bangladesh was created. And therefore, the Indian Air Force was very well prepared. Every day, from the day of my posting, they were all operational missions that ended either in gunnery or in air combat or in a strike. What you call this?
Like these were
A
some
practice.
training missions before the
Yeah, these
war.
are all training missions. But remember,
Hmm.
all our training missions are like real life operational missions, except that we don't carry weapons. But if
Hmm.
we do carry weapons, then we go to the range, concerned range that where you are,
Right.
which is allotted to you,
Hmm.
right? Okay, and we would go and discharge the weapons there, and you're being assessed for all those, weapon deliveries by the range safety officer, who has a means of calculating your errors, and he transmits it, and it's all recorded, and it comes back to your squadron. So those are the kind of uh, uh, missions that we were doing. And finally, on 3rd December, Pakistan, as expected, they unilaterally decided to strike all our bases in the western sector. On 3rd December night, they struck almost all our bases.
Hmm.
And we were in Halwara. We had already moved from Ambala to Halwara in preparation for the war. And sure enough, on third night, we saw the Canberra arrive, dropped its bombs on our runway.
Hmm.
Most of the bombs went outside, but one or two bombs hit the runway, which was patched up at night. So the next morning onwards, we were all systems go. We pulled out our war plans and we started off. You know, each almost aircraft doing three missions a day.
A day.
By day, per day, morning, evening, night. So for me, of course, I didn't do any dusk and night missions. Mine were all daytime missions, which were very nice missions, and I did very good gunnery work, and it was appreciated by the squadron because everything came out on film.
Okay.
So fourth morning we struck Chandeer airfield. It was a very good mission. Then fifth we struck a place called Chistian Mandi.
Christian Mandi. Okay.
Yeah, which is deep inside Pakistan from the Rajasthan sector side, on the Rajasthan. So there I struck a tank train, and that was very nice mission. I really enjoyed that mission. I hit uh, the engine and it exploded along with the first pallet with a tank on top of it. And so that was a very nice mission, and it impaired the war effort of Pakistan because the whole train was carrying fuel and tank.
Thanks.
Yeah, and they got caught out in the open. I think we had some intelligence information. But the crucial thing about this mission was we were sent from Halwara. All the way we had to climb high, then we had to descend, and at a place called Bhavalpur, we were at low level 100 feet. From there we turned right into Pakistan, and 60 kilometers inside Pakistan was the place called Chistian Mandi, which we struck. The purpose of telling you this was it was a really long range mission, and we had to do this mission in a configuration which ensured that fuel was best utilized. So it had to be high level, descend to low level, strike at low level, come back into India, get up to high level, come back to base at high level and descend. In fact, this particular mission, the calculated fuel was just 500 kgs a side, which is like 1 or 2 minutes flying time in operational flying speeds. So one had to come back and do a perfect circuit and landing and hope a great deal that the base was not struck at that time, or there was no interruption in our landing sequence, in our landing effort or in our landing sequence. Okay, so yes, it was a very memorable mission on the 5th. Then on the 6th, my CO and I were tasked to strike Dera Baba Nanak. And we struck Dera Baba Nanak, and on the way back, about 2 minutes into India, we had this call from the Army Forward Air Controller team, which is called the GLO, Ground Liaison Officers Team. So there was a call asking us to investigate just across the border, northwest of Amritsar, that a lot of movement was detected the previous night.
Gotcha.
To cut a long story short, when we crossed the border, we found a lot of static targets. That means camouflaged, vehicles like trucks, tanks, and there, covering all this night halt was done by by their strike corps, actually, and that is what was detected, unbeknownst to us, and to our fortune, their strategic force was detected, and that was moving up towards the Dera Baba Nanak and that area to support their war effort there, because they had crossed into India in the Dera Baba Nanak area region. So we had to cut them off there. So all these missions were being flown in support of cutting off the Pakistanis to ensure that no more support came from them for the people who had already crossed over. Because north of this region is the J&K road and the lifeline to Kashmir and beyond. Yes. So that was an important mission. We executed that mission, and when we were coming back, we had just guns with us. All the other rockets had been discharged on the bridge and targets next to the bridge. So there, in the run up across the border, we we detected a lot of these targets, and now we had to position ourselves for an attack. So the target given to me was the gun position, and I had roughly picked up that gun position, and this was a running commentary being given by an army colonel who was a brigade major there. This is quite a story actually. He was Colonel Chand, who was then Major Chand, who was actually the brigade major of his brigade, and they were not able to move forward because of this heavy machine gun, which was assigned to me. So that in the running commentary, I was able to pick it up and then position myself, and I did an attack. And in order to help out with the description of the target, this brigade major had climbed up on a high point, some building or some high position on our side, from where he was able to see this heavy machine gun which was stopping their movement, and he was able to relay the description to the GLO, the army guy with whom our Air Force pilot is sitting, the FAC, forward air controller. He sits with the GLO. So the forward air controller was controlling me, and in my first dive I picked up the target and I fired, and it hit the left side of the HMG, but it was not knocked out. So it was continuing to fire across, and there was a lot of fire coming at me also. So I positioned myself for a second attack. My CO was doing his own targets. I was flying with my CO, Wing Commander Alan DeCosta, as his number 2. And this was a 2-aircraft strike mission on Dera Baba Nanak, which now took a different turn and ended up in an Army co-op mission. And that's what I'm describing. So in the second attack, I positioned, and I got this. All my bullets went straight into that target, and it blew up. And the forward control also, came out on RT saying it was a good hit and target has been destroyed. So that is how that 86th Brigade moved out. There's quite a story to this, which I, will tell you a little later. But it comes out 53 years later, the story, and that's about Colonel Chand. So I will tell you that a little later. But in this second attack over this thing, I destroyed the target, but in the process, I was also hit, and my aircraft started smoking. I was able to see that, and the aircraft was involuntarily turning left into Pakistan, whereas I had to turn right and follow my leader, who was on my right. And the aircraft was not turning, and I knew the aircraft would catch fire. I was at low level, and the controls started misbehaving, so I ejected. I ejected at very high speed at low level, and when the parachute opened, I found that there was a tree higher than my eye level, and then I hit the ground. It was so low, and I fractured. I had a hairline fracture of the ankle, which later turned blue, and I had hurt my neck also because I ejected with cross controls, trying to keep that aircraft straight and preventing it from going into Pakistan deeper. And instead I wanted to turn to the right. Anyway, I ejected, was injured, and after 3 hours of crawling around and dealing with my injuries and sort of ascertaining my position mentally and both physically also, I crawled, and I found I'm getting into a minefield. Then I crawled back. I found that when the elephant grass cleared, I was in the direct line of fire of another LNG post. And there they had sent out 3 people. I had contact with them in khaki uniform, and were wearing half green helmets. So I knew I was on the other side, that is in Pakistan area, no man's land area. But they had already sent out a patrol. So to cut the story short a little bit, after 3 hours, when I decided that I'll wait for night, these guys somehow came to the area where I had ejected, and I was lying and hiding. And I was lying with my face down because I also needed some rest and recuperation. We had not, eaten and we were not, we had no rest in those 3-4 days of all these missions.
Mm-hmm.
So I had found somebody pulling me up by my collar, and it was the same three soldiers. And I was captured. Of course, they started beating me up, and one of them was from the Punjab sector of Pakistan. They wanted to shoot me and, execute me immediately. But luckily for me, within a couple of seconds, I would say about 30 seconds later, a Havaldar turned up. And he happened to be a Baluchi, as I learnt later, because he looked different. And he was the one who stopped all the execution that they wanted to
Yeah.
carry out. Because there was no time to take prisoners there. I was on the forwardmost picket,
Mm-hmm.
and they were losing the war. The battle was on. I could hear tanks near me, and tremendous amount of firing going on. Because after I was hit and I came down, my CO went back, and in the same area, because of the so many targets that were seen by both of us, he sent 6 or 8 missions continuously, one after the other, in those 3 hours that I was on the ground. And they were firing above my head, and firing above my head, and anything that would have undershot or any weapons, I would have been hit. It was a very precarious position that I was in.
That's what
And the
pilots
point,
do for their people. I mean, yeah.
and everybody is in hiding or underground. Nobody is overground in that area. So, or they're inside tanks. So the point I'm trying to make was that these people didn't want to take me as a POW. They found me. All that they needed was to, get a body and attach it to my aircraft, which had crashed inside. And they would have said that this is the pilot that was flying that aircraft, and he's been killed. So, and no question of taking POW and then taking care of him and being a liability. And I was on the forwardmost picket. But anyway, because of this Baluchi sergeant, I was saved. They tied me, of course, the usual procedure. I was stripped naked, blindfolded. My shoes were taken away. My hands were tied behind my back. And I was taken into the same LNG post, which was an underground,
Bunker.
bunker. Yeah. So I was there for about 3-4 hours, and surprisingly, for the information of our viewers, India leads officers first. Officers are the ones who lead the battle, both in the air and on the ground. Right? But in Pakistan, there were no officers that were seen in that bunker or anywhere near. Because for 4 hours, I was tied up in that thing and blindfolded, and that hand cranking phone was continuously being run to inform the rear headquarters that they had captured a pilot. And the sergeant was very keen to show that a pilot of the Indian Air Force, the aircraft of which had crashed inside Pakistan, has actually been physically captured. So his view was slightly different from the soldiers who wanted to say, "Isko bus maro, kyun rakh raha hai," and all that sort of stuff they were asking. And he said, "No, isko handover karna hai." And he saved my life, actually. And a very interesting incident happened. I had a golden cross chain around my neck, which my mother had given me.
Mm-hmm.
And that had been taken by this Baluchi sergeant, and he had kept it with himself. And the other things which I had, the currency and all, before he arrived, the Pakistani soldiers had taken away all that. And the pistol I had buried it. I had buried my parachute so that they couldn't find anything. What happens is when you eject and the civilians catch you, if you have a pistol, they shoot you with it. And that's what happened with Chati also. He got shot with his own pistol, and luckily the bullet penetrated his outer stomach skin, and he was not gravely injured. So for those reasons, it's common sense that you don't walk around with a pistol, because you can't fight 10 soldiers with one pistol or 4 or 5 soldiers in enemy territory. with a
Right.
pistol. So
Right.
it is only for self-defense in a case where you intelligently use it. But here I knew I was in the forwardmost picket. There was no point hanging around with a pistol, so I had to hide it. And so when they took me into the bunker, all the Pakistan currency was taken away, and this gold chain was taken into the custody of the sergeant. And I completely forgot about it. But this is a very interesting story, how I got it back 1 year later when I was crossing into
Repatriated back, I guess.
yeah, I got it back, and I can't believe that even today, 54 years after that return, it's a amazing story. Anyway, so to answer your question, these were the things that led to my capture and missions that I did. Yeah, anything specific that I have left out from your question? Other parts of the stories of the Sukhoi, well, that all emerged when I came back. So the POW part of the story we'll leave out here, and I will go on continue with your questions on the Sukhoi. There were some very interesting uh, facts that I need to bring out, which will support the very nature of our decision, the good decision taken to buy the Sukhoi. The first point is that during the war, the number of people who came back with bullet holes and parts of aircraft missing was several. But notably, there was one, Wing Commander Mangat, whose most of his rudder was shot off. Very little was left.
Acha.
And
Mahavir Chakra,
and
that pilot.
yes.
Yes.
He's the same person who got an MVC for bringing that aircraft back, and being the CEO, he continued to fly it, and came back limping with half his tailplane shot off and all of the rudder shot off. Just a little skeleton was left. That was one. Then, of course, any number of, the Sukhoi had a nose wheel which had two tires, and that was intentionally a design feature because you could land anywhere. And there have been many cases where people have landed and gone off the runway and without the aircraft getting damaged at all. And that is all in the course of landing at night or in an emergency situation. Not that pilots were unskilled and went off the runway. I don't mean that. It was all because of emergency. And I myself later on, as converting some of the youngsters, we would land on the taxi track if we had to. Then there was another incident where I was
with your high-speed landing problem. You had to land on the taxi track.
Yeah, the landing speed, takeoff speed was 340 kilometers, 360 kilometers per hour, and the landing speed was 340 kilometers per hour. So one of the highest landing speeds.
Yeah.
So one had to be really skilled at bringing that aircraft. But like I said, later as I learnt in my aerodynamics, this aircraft had a very thick wing, TC ratio, which produced lift even at a pretty good lift amount at 340 kilometers per hour. But below that, you would find it hard to control the aircraft at speeds below that. I'm talking about the attempt to land. You understand? Yeah. So we made sure that we were at 340 or more and put the nose down and apply full brakes, and you put out 2 parachutes to stop the aircraft. Yeah. So it was one of the fighters with the highest landing speeds of the time. And the aircraft also had tremendous thrust, 10,000 kilograms of thrust or 22,000 pounds of thrust. Actually, it was 23 pounds of thrust, with reheat on. That's tremendous amount of thrust.
2200 or 22,000?
23,000 pounds of thrust. Okay, so that gives you an idea of how quick the acceleration was and how at low level the high speed was sustained. Our normal cruise was 750 kilometers per hour,
Okay.
and attack speeds were 900 kilometers per hour, and runaway egress speeds were close to 1200 kilometers per hour. So,
At
and
that time.
all of these speeds were flown at 100 feet
Hmm.
and not more. It's only in our territory, once we were well inside India, we would climb up to height. Otherwise, all strike missions were done at 100 meters. Sorry, I beg your pardon, 100 meters, and the terminal stage is 100 feet, 30
I
meters.
think it is because of anti-aircraft firing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. To stay out of the radar horizon and to stay, yeah, and the reason why I say 100 feet is because 30 meters was what used to show on our radio altimeter,
30 meters.
30 meters and above, between 100 meters and 30 meters.
Right.
We never flew above that. So correction to my last statement, not 100 feet all the time. It was 100 meters low level, but in the after the attack and other phases, we would run out at 100 feet, which is 30 meters on the radio altimeter.
Okay.
After so many years, my memory is a bit
Hazy.
up and down here.
Fine.
Recalling everything. Yeah.
Now,
But anyway, so the other aspects about this Sukhoi is its rugged mechanical ejection seat system.
Mhm.
Almost everything in this aircraft was mechanical. It did not have any assisted controls. I think you have asked me one of your questions
Right.
was about stability augmentation systems.
Mhm.
This aircraft had nothing. So there were no computers controlling the control. There were no sensors that controlled or gave inputs to make changes to control
Everything
systems.
was analog at that time.
Absolutely. So it was purely flying skill, your hand on the stick, your left hand on the throttle. So you were essentially a very good stick throttle guy and a very stable platform at low level. So you just hurtled along. The lower you were, the better it was on this aircraft.
Right.
So that was the thing. Anyway, I also wanted to touch upon another incident on the Sukhoi to show its ruggedness. So I was converting a young flying officer, or perhaps he was a flight lieutenant in those days. Yeah, they had all flying officer days were over, and he was a young flight lieutenant. And I was teaching him circuits and landing, and he had to go solo on this particular mission. So I was also getting, a bit frustrated that he wasn't getting the landing attitude right. But I was an instructor who would not touch the controls
Acha.
and allow the pilot to make his own mistakes, do a takeover in time so that he knows exactly when he's made the mistake. You show him the point where he's made the mistake and then make him do it again at that point where he corrects his mistake.
No, sir. At that time, you were present physically inside the aircraft or during the.
No, it's a two-seater trainer.
Two-seater trainer. Okay.
Yes.
Mhm.
So there were two versions of the Sukhoi. Single-seater strike, which is 18 aircraft, 16
Which you
aircraft
were
in a
flying in the
squadron.
war, right?
So this was after the war. I'm giving you examples to support the ruggedness
No, I
of the
understand.
aircraft and
Okay.
our decision to buy this aircraft. So just giving you examples of Sukhoi and its ruggedness and what all we have gone through and how our safety was still what should I say? It was still safe to fly that aircraft in all those environments that we put it through. Yeah. So on the final approach, I was flying a trainer aircraft in which the periscope, you have to look at the runway through a periscope. You can't see the runway from the back. It is so bad, the visibility.
Right.
And yet we used to fly this aircraft in dark night and everything. So that was all skill. So this is a case where this youngster was not getting his landing approach perspective. So it was the final landing, and I left it to him. I said, I'm not going to show it to you anymore. You do it on your own. And now when I opened the periscope, in the explosive opening of the periscope, it had got misaligned.
Acha.
And I didn't realize that the periscope had got misaligned. I was still able to see the runway, but the perspective that I saw was high. The actual perspective was really low, and had made a mistake, and he was in a low. He was continuing with the same mistake, and in this thing he was so low that we flew through a tree, and there was no more fuel. So I took over the controls and landed the aircraft. And after landing, we found that there were a lot of branches, thick branches, stuck in the undercarriage. It was so rugged. So, and I still remember the airmen came and they pulled out all these branches, and not a single scratch on the trainer. They just cleared off everything, and within 1.5 hours we were back to flying that aircraft again. After refueling it and checking the intake, nothing had got inside the engine. An engine check and everything was done. A ground run was given, and we flew it again. But that's how rugged this was. Then again, after coming back, I had 2 more ejections on the Sukhoi. And these were also in very difficult circumstances. The second ejection was when the control rod of the aileron fractured, again at low level. This was again at 100 meters low level, striking Delhi air defenses. This is the check for Delhi air defenses, and the target given always is 503 SU, signal unit. So we entered the Delhi defense area at low level, and it was very bad visibility. The Jaguars which were ahead of us could not find the target, and they were heading home. We found the target, and just before the attack, my aircraft started rocking at low level. And what happened was the aileron control rod left side had fractured, and the left aileron floated fully up. So I had to, aircraft was rolling into the ground. So with full right rudder and reducing the speed and calling off the strike, I took the aircraft to about 500 to 800 meters height. And there the hydraulics by then had failed. And I ejected almost in the inverted position.
Like this, I mean.
Yeah, correct. And this aircraft, like another aircraft, the MiG-23 incident, this aircraft, stalled, floated, recovered, whatever it did after I ejected from 800 meters, it went and landed on its belly perfectly and got burnt, and only the engine section got burnt because of the fuel. Otherwise, the rest of the aircraft was intact, and that's how they were able to find out that the left aileron control rod was fractured.
Okay.
And
marvelous. This is marvelous.
Yes, it's quite a thing. Of course, I landed up, I fractured my shoulder, fractured my ankle. I was in hospital for a month, almost, because of the injuries.
Right.
Yeah, so I don't know why they kept me so long. I was feeling quite all right, but I suppose it was the second ejection. They wanted to check spine and all that. But after that, within 1 year, during a air combat mission, it being inspected by the Dasi, my attacker was a Dasi inspector, later became a good friend. He was from One Coast Junior, and he also, like me, was first in the batch. So he was the inspector in the Directorate of Air Staff Inspection, and he was the attacker. So we did one combat. It came out well, and in that combat, I found all my fuel low-level warning lights came on. And meanwhile, the attacker, this Dasi inspector, was yelling out on RT, he said, "Kuru, your aircraft's on fire." So I looked inside, there was no fire warning, but I quickly saw all the fuel warning lights were coming on quick succession.
Okay.
So I switched off the reheat, called off the combat, and started heading to base.
Okay.
And the interesting thing is, my engine flamed out at 1 kilometer distance from the runway, but I did not have enough. height. Otherwise, to continue the story, if I had enough height, I would have been able to do a dead stick landing, a forced landing without engine. And I felt really bad that I couldn't do a forced landing, because it would have been a historical thing to be able to do a dead stick
Yes.
landing on a Sukhoi, which had a very high rate of descent. Without the engine, the rate of descent was something like 40 meters per second. That's about 120, 150 feet per second.
Per second.
But yeah, but I had enough experience by then, and I was very confident of landing that aircraft without the engine. But I had no height. So at 800 meters, I ejected again in a turn to the left. Again, I got injured, and but somehow this aircraft, they were able to uh, find the wreckage. But the very next day, a similar ejection took place. Unknown fuel light, same indications, all fuel warning lights coming on, and the engine flamed out. But that pilot ejected safely, and from his aircraft and the symptoms, and from my aircraft wreckage, it was found that one of the fuel pipelines was where a hose is connected, and that joint is between two metal pipes, which is the hose that connects them. That hose had failed. So after the next day's ejection of that flight lieutenant, all the Sukhois were grounded, and every aircraft was checked for the correct connection, and then they started flying again. But it just goes to show how rugged this aircraft was, and it served us very well in the war and after the war. And I think it was a very good decision to buy this aircraft for the reasons that I've already told you. It came to us at a very economical price. It came to us for the right reasons. That means in the flying, we were able to fly in mountains, in rugged terrain. The mishandling of the aircraft, it didn't let you down. In landing, I'm talking about landing errors, and or emergency landings, or landing at night with problems, with emergencies. Even if it went off the runway, there was no big deal at all. It just took a lot of beating. So that's that about your point on instances and ruggedness and the correct decision or not whether to buy this aircraft. So you can go ahead now. What is
Yeah,
the
I
other
was
question?
also looking for some technical details on the nighttime flying capability of this aircraft, sir.
Yeah.
So, your
So
experiences on that, sir.
we had no technical advantage for night flight. All right.
Okay.
All that we did was we followed the doctor's advice, pre-oxygenation. We religiously breathed about 30 minutes of oxygen on the ground, pure oxygen, before takeoff.
Okay.
So that your eyesight was sharp. The eyes, the rods and cones in the eyes are very oxygen hungry, parts of the eye. And the rods and cones are what really gives you the sharpness of your night vision and eyesight. Other than that, it had all the instruments that were lit accordingly, as in any fighter aircraft, for night flying. Okay. And there was a light which you could use for map reading in case you were doing night strike. Other than that, there was no advantage at all. So night flying was quite tricky, and dark night I have done on the Sukhoi. It's later on in Hindon, that too in bad visibility. It was extremely tricky, but if you did good instrument flying and you followed the basics, not to look out, to trust your skills, and not to follow your instincts or your sensations, that you follow just the instruments, everything was fine. So all the night flying was done by radar control of the in the latter years we got the ATC radar, which you could use which could help you to position in line with the runway. And that's all that was required. The rest of the thing was all flying still. So nothing specific, Dasu, on the Sukhoi for night flying.
Now, sir, coming to the fun part of the aircraft, I would like to know a bit about the weapon systems and how you manage to handle and use them. Like, sir, this was really what I can say, an honor to know that the Air Force was spending ordnance on one machine gun so that the infantry down there is safe. This is something rarely talked about, sir. And
yeah, it is not only the ordnance of guns. If I had rockets, I would have discharged rockets, which is a heavier weapon. But we had already pumped all our rockets into the targets in Dirababan.
right.
So what we had was guns, and the Sukhoi gun cartridge is almost a foot long. They are extra, what do you call this, extra high charged rounds, which gives you the capacity to open fire at 2 kilometers. From 2 kilometers, and yet they are the high explosive rounds would create the destruction that was intended. And that's exactly what happened in the attack that I did on the HMG.
Right.
So here, it may be of interest to you if I just tell you how 53 years later, this brigade major was still looking for me. For 50 years, he was looking for me, trying to figure out if Kuruvilla is alive. That was his first question when he found me. And the second question was, did you get any gallantry award? Because we had recommended you through the army channels for a gallantry award. So 50 years later when we chatted, I told him, yes, I'm alive and talking to you, and I got a Veer Chakra from the Air Force. And it was in the mission I survived, and I was taken prisoner of war. I was in a Pakistani prison for 1 year, and I told him parts of that story. And do you know, on 6th of December last year, barely 3 months ago, I was honored at the Atari border. And this colonel, who is now 89 years old, came to speak, and he came to the Atari border. I was so impressed. And he was a wonderful officer. He was 89 years old, yet he came. And he was there, and I made sure that they honored him as well, though it was entirely for my, to honor me because I had walked through that border.
Right.
And Colonel Chand's script was, of course, read out by the BSF because press was not allowed on that day. And but we met, and it was a fantastic reunion because he saw every bit of my mission and my attacks, and on the Yahoo group he has written, "Ye Kuruvilla kaun hai? Ye diler pilot, ye aaj marega." So this is what he has written on the Yahoo group. So when I read it after we had discovered each other, it was Air Marshal Bojwani who put it on the Yahoo group because he was the one who gave Colonel Chand my whereabouts and my address and my phone number. Anyway, so after 6th December this last year, on the 7th he took us to his unit, which was the same place that I had attacked. And I met all the Jawans. So it was a wonderful reunion 53 years later with all the Jawans of the army on the ground and with him briefing all his unit people who were there that this is the pilot who attacked and destroyed the position.
Dogra, right, sir?
Yeah, sorry?
This was 10 Dogra regiment or some other unit?
I don't remember which unit, I'm sorry. I don't remember. Yeah. And but I could find out for you and you can include it in your script.
Wonderful, sir.
But Yeah, so after that, seeing the units and after seeing the Ravi River and where I ejected and where the tall elephant grass was where I hid, it was a very nostalgic moment for me, very emotional. Even the honoring and the presentation and the trophies that I got at the Atari border during that
Hmm.
ceremony, they're very, very emotional because you recall walking back, and you were the youngest, so you were the last person to cross the border.
Right.
So here I will tell you that little story also.
Mm-hmm.
When I was crossing the border,
Mm-hmm.
I was the last person to cross it,
Mm-hmm.
and it was nearing the time for the gate closing.
Mm-hmm.
Once the gates close, nobody can open it for you, and it opens only when there is an exchange of prisoners or exchange of citizens who are coming back,
Mm-hmm.
right? So on that day, it had opened just to let us, Air Force element and the Army element. Army had crossed before us, and Air Force element, 12 of us, 10 of us crossed later. So I was the last. And as I was entering into that no man's land part, I had crossed a person standing there dangling something which was blackish green.
Acha, acha.
I don't know what made me turn around. I turned around, ran there, and I rubbed that thing. It was my gold chain, and I couldn't make out it was mine because he was holding the cross,
Right, right.
and only the chain was dangling. So I told him this is mine, and he said, "Well, you have to come and sign for it." So I said, "I can't go back, and gates are going to close." He said, "No, you have to." So I ran back with him. I signed, and I took the gold chain, and I ran back, and as I crossed, the gates closed. It was a hair-raising moment for me, but I had to have it. It was my mother's 8 tola gold chain, heavy chain.
Mm-hmm.
And in the meantime, you won't believe it, the army had been taken away, the Air Force had been taken away, and I was left alone. One jeep was waiting for me,
Acha.
and the bugles had blown and the flag lowering and all was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And this army Jawan took me to the place where the others were, and that was an open Maidan where the Chief Minister of Punjab was actually welcoming home all the POWs, and I just merged into the crowd and got fired by the senior most, who said, "Why did you go back?" I said, "Sir, we've always been taught to take decisions. I took a decision. I know it was a risk." He said, "What if you had been kept back and the gates had closed and you would have been kept back and it would have been another incident,
Right.
between the two countries and all that sort of stuff." He
Now,
told me I
who
was
was the person who gave you back the chain, sir? It was that same Havaldar.
No, the Havaldar had returned it.
Acha, acha.
So, but somebody from his unit
Mm-hmm.
was standing there
Mm-hmm.
with it, and I don't know what happened to the Havaldar. He was not the person. Somebody else was standing. So, but the point that comes out here is, the Baluchis, as you know what's happening there today, they always have loved Indians. They want to merge with India and they want to have good relationship with India and all that.
Right.
So I think historically it comes out very clearly that this sergeant who not only saved my life was honest enough to return my chain, and not only to return the chain but to coordinate the entire return, because when we were being returned to India, the students of Lahore had created a huge ruckus.
Mm-hmm.
They had get out our prison in Lailpur, and they said we will not allow the prisoners to go. So there was no press reports. I don't know how the sergeant found out or how their system worked, but there it was. The chain was dangling. Somebody holding it. Moss, dark green moss had grown on it, and the cross was not visible. Yet I ran back. All this now, is a thing that's going through my mind.
Right.
I can't tell you how it was at that moment when I was crossing. It was just an instinctive decision, like a fighter pilot in the cockpit. I just took the decision to go back. I rubbed it. I had to reclaim it. I had to go back and sign. I did all that, ran back, crossed the border. It's unbelievable.
It is
So
yeah.
these are a couple of stories that come out, with what should I say, with great nostalgia. The
Okay.
ejections, the POW tenure,
Mhm.
the meeting of Colonel Chand, the honoring at Wagah border or the Atadi border, the gold chain that I got back, the two more ejections, and they're all a part of my life.
Right.
And yeah, indeed. And I'm so grateful that you are going to put it out there for a younger generation to get to hear and know about all this.
As
You
much
know,
as possible,
I'm
sir.
now Colonel Chand is 89, I'm 81. I just finished my 80th birthday and crossed
He was
over to.
brigade major, right? He would be older than you.
He was a brigade major.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a major.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So, sir, before ending this program, I would like to know a bit more technical stuff, like the weapon systems and how you as a pilot managed it onto the targets during training and also during combat, sir.
Okay. So that's a very simple question to answer,
Mm-hmm.
Das, because just as I had done on the vampire, just as I had done on the hunter,
Mm-hmm.
the same thing was done here. Only thing is, we were now handling Russian weapons.
Acha.
And yeah, that's all. Russian weapon systems are very good. They are great mechanical engineers. One day, if you have the time, I will tell you how, after the Second World War, when Germany surrendered, the electronics and electrical engineers were lured by the Americans, and the Russians lured the mechanical engineers.
Acha.
So you will find that all their stuff, the Russians, are great mechanical um, feats achieved in their creations.
Hmm.
The Sukhoi ejection seat had 150 mechanical operations that took place in in the first 1.75 seconds and in the total 2.5 seconds of the ejection sequence. So that's how many mechanical operations took place, if my memory serves me right.
Mm-hmm.
And to answer your question, the weapon systems were very simple things: rockets, guns, and bombs. That's all we had. And there were mechanical locks, mechanical safety measures. There was nothing electronic at all. And firing a gun on the Sukhoi was just like firing a gun on the vampire or the hunter.
Acha, acha.
Hopefully you had it. But of course, the gun sight was ancient.
Mm-hmm.
It was a complicated, complex gun sight in its creation. But in its utilization, all that a pilot saw was a ring and a bead.
Just
You
like
put the bead,
rifles. I mean, hand rifles. Yeah.
that's right. Backside and a foresight. Here, both the sights are together,
Mm-hmm.
you
You
know,
shoot.
overlapping, each other. They are, I'm forgetting some of the technical terms,
No,
but
no, it's just like a rifle. I understood, sir. Like backside
yeah.
and front side.
No, not
Yes.
only that. I think it is called a collimated lens,
Acha,
where,
acha.
the pipper is seen. You
Mm-hmm.
can see in the pipper, it is superimposed
Acha, acha.
inside a ring in the center. And you have to
Okay.
just,
Like
the
those
ring was,
Olympic sport air rifles. Yeah, they have that system.
well,
Uh-huh.
possibly so,
Mhm.
but this was now, you know, and the pipper, you saw it at infinity. So you placed it on your target and you fired, whatever it was, guns or rockets.
Acha,
Same
acha.
thing for bombs. You use the pipper, but the sight had to be depressed. There was changes in the sight settings. That's all. Just like any other gun sight. And as I said, technical aspects of the weapon, nothing technical about it. They were just great weapons, guns, rockets, and bombs. I
Mm.
told you, they were very lethal gun cartridges, 1 foot long, 30 mm caliber, extra long range. You could fire it from 2 kilometers and still hit the target.
Name of the gun,
With
sir,
a,
if it's possible.
uh, 1 minute, I think I have this one somewhere here. I think it was NR30.
And
Let me just check that for you. Yeah, NR30, correct.
okay.
I'm right. It was called the NR30 and it was 100 rounds per gun, but we used to only load 70 to prevent any gun jamming, because
Okay.
the, the heat generated is tremendous
Right, right.
and rapid fire. So,
So in
it,
case of if you got involved in dog fights, you had to
yeah,
use the gun. It was just 70
yeah,
rounds.
70. Oh, you know, I have used the guns just, I used to get about out of 20, we used to fire 20 rounds.
Okay.
Out of that, we used to get 4 or 5 hits. Sometimes I've had 7 hits.
Hmm.
You just need one round on a target.
Acha, acha,
Okay.
acha.
If you, if you get 7 rounds into a ground target,
Hmm.
it's considered a very good score
Okay.
because you remember that you're opening fire at
Hmm.
somewhere around 1.1800 meters slant range,
Hmm.
1.8 kilometers, and in that 300 meters by about 1.5 kilometers or a kilometer, you have to stop firing. Otherwise, that momentum will make you pull out low and you'll be hit by your own debris
Okay. Okay.
and
Okay. Got it.
debris damage.
Hmm.
Okay, so all these things you have to keep in mind. And there is something known as target fixation. Many pilots have gone into the ground
Hmm.
because they pulled out late and low
Hmm.
because they've got fixed on their eyesight. You know, their eyesight has just got fixed on the target. It's called target fixation,
Acha, acha, acha.
right? Yeah, so those kind of things can happen to you. And
Okay.
as far as the bombs, I told you we had 4 hard points, 4 500 kg bombs we could carry. That was 2,000 kilograms of bombs you could drop on any target.
Hmm.
So, and we used that very, very effectively.
And the same kind of sighting systems were there.
Same sight system. In
Okay.
fact, when the amount of aircraft were found to be damaged, the Sukhois and the kind of damage, we then started changing our tactics and we started medium level glide bombing. That means you go to the target at low level, do a very sharp pull up with reheat. You know, you had that and rate of climb was very high.
Hmm.
With reheat or that afterburner, the rate of climb would be 160 meters per second. So
Okay.
that's how high it was at those speeds. So you could pop up to about 2 kilometers very quickly, switch off your reheat, enter the dive, and discharge your weapon, do a very hard turn to any one side, get down quickly, engage your reheat, get into high speed, and back. So minimum time over target, maximum in damage because of the
Hmm.
bombs, 2,000 kg. We also had the capacity to, instead of doing 500 kg bombs, we could do 1800 kg bombs. Nuisance value. You
Okay.
know, you, yeah, 100 kg bomb also is quite an explosive.
Hmm.
But if you leave them lying around with various time fuses,
Hmm.
you have to find them out and then
You have to
defuse
disassemble
them.
them. Right. Right.
Yeah, so delayed fuse bombs also were used as a tactic,
Hmm.
in army areas and all that, so that you keep the enemy engaged in other than their own operational
Hmm.
employment,
I mean, you have
waste
to
their
keep
time.
the engineers engaged in diffusing these bombs, right?
That's right. Not only diffuse, you have to find them also.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Right.
yeah,
Very interesting, sir. Very interesting.
all
And
right.
last question, sir. I mean, I would like to know your number of flying hours on the Sukhoi 7, sir.
Yeah, so I had close to 400 hours by the
400.
time I left.
Acha, acha.
So 400 hours would be roughly about 600 missions,
600 missions.
in, yeah. So in the 2 years in triple two and then back into Sukhoi after that, 2 years in other squadrons, around, that is the total number of hours I had, roughly.
400. I mean, before shifting to other aircrafts. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, from there I went on to fly MiG-23s, MiG-27, Jaguar, all these things.
Okay. Wonderful, wonderful, sir. And I mean, this was really technical and wonderful of a talk on Sukhoi 7, sir. And yeah,
You're most welcome. I hope I have answered all your questions, and I know my memory has served me right up to 90%, but I haven't spoken in a long time for so long on a Sukhoi A7, and,
okay.
and
It's
you've been asking me
fascinating. Yes, sir. And
technical
I think it's
questions.
a very fascinating aircraft, and because it was deployed so much on the Western Front. It got, I mean, most of the aircraft shot were Sukhoi 7s, I guess.
You know, it was one of the most, what should I say? It was one of the nicest aircraft. I want to use plain language that I have ever flown. I enjoyed flying the Sukhoi. I could throw it around. Even youngsters, we are not supposed to do very low level flying, but you know, as an instructor and as a QFI flying instructor as well, I could show some of these pilots, you know, low speed mishandling of controls. And some of the ways of doing was to show them how you could go wrong in maneuvers, right? Like you're doing a loop, or you're doing, you know, a roll off the top. You know, these maneuvers and a roll off the top, you are at the top of a loop at a low speed and you're rolling. So there's aileron controlled with elevator control. At low speeds, this combination can easily land you into a spin. In fact, you get into a spin by applying full rudder and moving the stick back diagonally to one side, isn't it? So, and these aircraft, the Sukhoi, could get into a spin quite easily. But at the incipient stage, we would recover it.
Nice.
You know, so you could demonstrate a stall turn, but not at very low speed.
I think it's
You
because
start
of
the-
wings being at 60-degree angle, I guess.
That's right. Not only that, the rudder became very less effective as the speeds kept on reducing. So you had to apply, and the rudder had to be applied against a 19 kg pressure. It was spring loaded.
Okay.
So it was kept locked in the neutral position. So to move it initially, you needed about 19 kgs of pressure, foot pressure, right? If I remember my,
You have to,
Jen, right, all my facts.
you have to push it very
So,
strongly.
but once you moved it out of the neutral position, then the tension of the spring, you had to move the rudder against that. So it was a fair amount of force to be applied. So if you're applying that pressure and you forget the stick and its position and all, you'll end up in a spin, you know, a normal spin or an inverted spin, and you'll be in big trouble. So low speed handling was also something that I used to show as an flight commander, only authorized, you know, authorized,
And when you were in the
with the-
trainer, I would say.
yeah, of course, in the trainer. And yeah, so one could do a lot of things, and I found it one of the best aircraft that I've flown, both in combat and in ground attack. If at low level, you could do excellent combat with it because G was not the limitation. It was you who were the limitation.
Right.
In a low level strike mission, one of the Dasi attackers trying to get behind us pulled 9G plus, and the surface skin on the wing had wrinkled and the pitot head had flown off. So that's the amount of battering this aircraft could take. So we were very confident. I was extremely confident with this aircraft, sitting in that cockpit and holding that stick. I felt like I could do anything with it. You know, I mean, that was the level of confidence. Of course, we never broke the rules. We always flew. You're a senior pilot and you have to show the way and lead by example. And leadership in the air is very important. And airmanship and rules of the air are very strictly followed. Anybody who tends to show any overconfidence, we remove him from flying because 100% he'll go and kill himself.
Right. I mean, I mean, these
Okay.
things are needed to be kept in mind with flying. Yeah.
Yes, of course. Yeah. When you teach flying, you sort of regurgitate everything you learn from your basics on every type, because the type has changed, the aircraft has changed. Your flying skill may not have changed, but what you have learned, the basics, need to be re-employed on the new type. And you learn the quirks on that aircraft, what are the pitfalls, what are the dangers, what are the nice points, how to exploit the good points and use the aircraft And that's the good thing about pilots of the Indian Air Force and the Indian Air Force training. The SAS training that we received was full exploitation of the aircraft. And you would be, I would see, I would say you would be kicked around if you didn't perform.
Right.
You know, you got very little time to prove yourself. In 7 Squadron, within the first month when you started your flying, within the first month you knew whether you survive or not. Within the first couple of sorties you knew whether you're going to survive in the squadron or not. Because everybody is so highly trained, squadron was so well reputed, and you had to fetch up. There was no such a thing of thinking of weekends and all. You only ate, slept, and did flying. That's all.
Right.
Thinking, eating, everything was flying, and how to be a good pilot, fighter pilot. So that kind of training was the
Necessary
was
for
the
war.
that's right. And we were flying old aircraft, you know. I mean, older generation. Now we are in the 5th generation aircraft, and
Right.
you know, getting into the upper generation. So those older generations, everything was a lot of seat of the pants flying, a lot of skill was involved, and a lot of danger at low level. But you know, it was like the back of your palm. You never thought anything about it when you look at the back of your palm. It's the same feeling. You just got in and flew. You just concentrated on the mission, especially low-level navigation missions and all already, because you had nothing else other than a compass. If you didn't steer the correct course, you wouldn't reach your target. So accuracy in flying was so important.
Right. And thank you again, sir, for taking your time and talking about this aircraft. I mean, thank you so much.
Most welcome. My God, we've spoken a very long time, I think.
Yes,
Almost 2 hours.
And
All
I
right.
needed to squeeze the information of the Sukhoi 7, sir. I mean, I couldn't help it. It was so interesting.
Okay, that's fine. Fine. That's right. Lot of things.
Lot of things. As much as possible regarding 71 war, sir.
All
Okay
right.
then, sir. Thank you and have a good day.
Yeah, you too. Take
Thank you,
care.
sir. Thank you.
All the best. Thank you.